Here I am milking Tokyo Ghoul once again for views, because I don't have ads on my videos anymore, so what's the point? Today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into a character known as Rize. Someone who I think had so much potential, but ultimately was not realistically played on to the extent. And when you kind of go through the story, it doesn't really matter, but when you get to the ending of the story and the conclusion and the impact she played right at the end in the Dragon arc, it brings up the question why? And what happened? Obviously I can't say I understand what Sui Ishida was trying to do with Rize in terms of the finale of the story, because we don't know what Rize was. For the most part, I liked how he used Rize as a character. Taking the ending out of my mind, Rize was this character that was so vitally important to the, development of Carnegie. She also played this side role as herself in the story, basically, where you would see these small snippets of her in pain or torture, and Carnegie would ultimately come to her rescue. You seen her once, Carnegie saved her, and then she was ultimately with Carnegie's group, and the whole Shachi situation happened, and then she was back in Furuta's hand being tortured, and etc, etc. There's probably a bunch of other times, but I can't fucking remember. But that's it. That's the whole consensus of her character outside of Carnegie's mentality. She is a character that's tortured and has this tragedy kind of encapsulated around her. When you get to the end of the story, however, with Rize being reborn into the world from a birthing tool that is so vitally important, that is built of her RC cells. Because at the end of the day, she is an extremely important character when it comes to the origin of RC cells. She is very pure and she is very powerful. You obviously don't know about this stuff until, the later half of the story, and it's a massive reveal, but it's never evidently played upon. But more so for me, the way Ishida used Rize as a character as this other tragedy, if you will, a tragedy that is intertwined with Carnegie's, could have been so much more in my opinion. I feel like Ishida either didn't know what he was doing with Rize, or he didn't know the direction he was going in with the finale of the story and adding Rize back into the story. But ultimately, you could take Rize out of the equation and replace it with almost any other character, right? You can replace the birthing tool of Dragon with another version of Carnegie. You could replace it with Eto Yoshimura, you could replace it with Arima, you could replace it with Old Man Yoshimura, you could replace it with Arata. What I'm trying to say is, the way Ishida built upon the foundation of what Dragon was, a quote-unquote thing that could evidently give birth to a new being. Do note that we originally came off the fact that Ishida was basically going around and claiming he could resurrect people. Then we move into Dragon giving birth to people. It's kind of safe to assume that you could replace Rize with any other character, but because it's Rize, it's very symbolic for the ending of the story. Unfortunately, the symbolism only goes so far, right? You have the start of the story that's very symbolic, and then you have this mental progression, and it kind of fizzles out throughout the mid part of the story, and then right at the end you get smacked with all of that symbolism once again. To me, it seems very forced. It seems very pick and choosy, if you will. Don't get me wrong, I loved the idea of Rize being kind of like the final face Carnegie got to witness in this whole catastrophe, in his whole tragedy. The final thing that stopped Carnegie from living the tragedy that he was in was Rize, another character that was put through the paces and also living her own tragedy. I've said this a couple of times, but there is definitely one thing that I would have loved to seen, which I feel like in my opinion would have fit so goddamn perfectly, and it also would have answered a good handful of questions regarding what Rize was at the end. But for me, Rize potentially shedding a tear and basically saying the words, "Thank you, Carnegie," would have been the utmost conclusion for me. It would have probably brought me to tears, and it would have flowed so extremely well with the story, with Furuta kind of relapsing on his ideologies and humanizing him right at the end, wanting a whole different life, being forced basically into the life he was and going to extreme lengths to try and achieve the life he wanted, to now Rize shedding a tear in front of Carnegie and thanking him for taking her out of her tragedy. This would have clarified a couple of different things. One, this would have clarified the fact that Rize knew who she was and she knew who Carnegie was, which clarifies that Rize is technically immortal, meaning that be reborn and have have the same memories that she had previously. That would have clarified that, because that's something that I was very interested in, immortality and the portrayal of, you know, RC cells being used in a medical field. It was safe to assume that on the scale of dragon, immortality or an extent of it would be very close to realistic. Not only would have clarified that, it would have actually, in my opinion, fully ended off, you know, the Rize and Carnegie situation. This was a reunion that was bound to happen. It was a reunion we very much needed, but we didn't know we needed it. And this is where the idea of Ishida not necessarily knowing what to do with Rize comes into play, because we all kind of went into the ending of the story not knowing what to expect. I don't think anyone at all expected Rize to make her return, because like I said before, Ishida didn't play on her. But when it comes to the ending of the story, it was her tragedy and our tragedy, you know, a reunion between Carnegie and Rize, and it all escalated and climbed to extreme paces when Carnegie went into that dragon form, when he met Rize in his mind. Even then, I don't think people knew that Rize was going to be the kind of final big thing that dragon was going to give birth to. If anything, because Ishida built Rize in a way that kind of plays off as a pillar for Carnegie's mentality, it would make sense that while in dragon, Carnegie would view the most vicious side of himself, which is Rize, but more so view Rize as herself and not himself, if that makes sense. I absolutely loved that interaction. I loved that Carnegie met Rize in his mind. A lot of people think, you know, most likely a legitimate thing as well, because it was never really specifically mentioned that it was in his mind, but it's more so implied that it very much well is. The fact that he's also wearing clothes, he's in a building, like it's not a literal in dragon situation, which a lot of people got confused. It's also very metaphorical, it's symbolic, as the place that it resides in, which is this kind of sky meets water situation, is kind of true to Carnegie's mind. He's always kind of had that symbolic nature of the sky meeting the water, and that's kind of like the resemblance of both sides of himself. And also at the very beginning, even if you've seen the anime intros, they play on it very heavily, of two Carnegies colliding, or two worlds colliding to form one. The sky and the depths of the water meeting the surface creates Carnegie, you know the whole anime intro. That Rize Carnegie, very beautiful. It was incredible. I really enjoyed it. But looking back on it now, there was just so much that I believe that Ishida maybe wanted to do, or potentially just didn't know where to go with Rize. When you kind of play off the story of Rize as her tragedy and our tragedy, there could have been so much more that Ishida could have implemented into the story, even if it was only little by little, to help kind of flesh Rize out more as a character and make her more relatable, someone that you could feel emotion for. Because the situation that I would have loved to see, that would have been very emotional, with Rize crying and thanking Carnegie, is more so forced in nature, but there is just enough knowledge that we know about Rize to make you feel sorry for her. If I use the ending that Ishida went with, and how he kind of portrayed Rize at the end, I would have loved to seen a lot more kind of played upon her throughout this story. You obviously feel bad for her, but it's nothing extremely emotional, right? And when you get to the ending of the story and you have this confrontation between two very symbolic individuals, it seemed very flat, in my opinion. It seemed like it could have been maximized a lot more, and it could have been extremely fucking emotional. The reunion between two characters that are so heavily intertwined with one another just didn't reach that height of expectation for me personally. And that doesn't equate to it being bad at all. I just felt like it was flat, and I definitely feel like Ishida could have put a lot more emphasis on Rize, like I said, to make her more relatable, to draw more emotion, because as emotional as the Rize and Carnegie physical reunion was, the mental reunion was more so emotional, if anything. In my opinion, the mental reunion he just had prior to them physically meeting was a lot better than their physical reunion. It's more so that Rize, I'm not sure, knew who Carnegie was then, and that boils down to a lot of different things. If Ishida was going to use Rize at the end of the story as someone being rebirthed from dragon, like I said, you could replace that with basically any other character, obviously with a little bit of reworking and tact regarding dragon and the RC cells and whatnot. You know, you could add legitimately any other character into the story that would be a lot more emotional without no words being said, like a Rima, for example. Imagine how that would have impacted Carnegie. You know, that would have been fucking incredible. Even Eto would have been really good as well. I think to end it off, I enjoyed what Ishida done with Rize on a week-to-week basis, but looking back, I feel like the desire to know Rize more comes into play. I feel like I want to know every individual little thing about Rize to get to that emotional ending that maybe he was trying to go for. I feel like we have this really strong beginning, little to nothing in the middle, and then a really strong ending that comes off more so forced, if you will. I can't blame Ishida for that, you know, because I enjoyed seeing Rize and I wouldn't want any other character to be in her place. But when it comes to the conclusion of the story and the conclusion of Rize and Carnegie's tragedy, the desire to know more about her, to feel more emotion for her, definitely sets in. And I feel like Ishida definitely could have fleshed her out a lot more instead of just showing us in these torture chambers and how poorly she was being treated. We've only seen small snippets of her flashback, nothing to really draw much emotional relatability to, so it would have been nice to see. But overall, she's always been a mysterious character, and you know what, maybe Ishida wanted to keep her like that. Maybe Ishida didn't want to play on her to that extent and kind of make her be this crumbling pillar at the end of the story for Carnegie's mentality, a final hurdle that he had to overcome to end not only his tragedy but her tragedy. And when you look at it like that, it's more so beautiful, if anything, and not sad, but you never really know. So that's basically it. Let me know how you feel about Rize. You like her? Do you hate her? Do you feel like she could have been played upon more? Or do you feel like she sat in a pretty good realm of development? More so through Carnegie, but definitely more so herself as a character. With that being said, I'm actually going to end the video for you. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.